Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests and an open mic, inviting all readers of all ages. After gathering for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space, and I'm grateful this allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. And tonight I see many familiar and new faces. Always a joy to see this Zoom room brimming with poets and listeners from near and far. And most of you know our Poetry Night tradition, and I'd love to know where you are joining me from. So please feel free to share that in the chat. And thank you all for being here and zooming in. With this month's theme being vision and words, I intended to curate a poetry night offering that immerses the audience in a multi-sensory experience where vision itself becomes language. And this experience is a sort of gathering, a conjuring of images, words, and various poetic forms that transport us beyond mere seeing into the realm of feeling. There is a Sanskrit word for poet, which is kavi. And in classical Sanskrit, it is applied to any maker of verse. But in the Vedas, which are the oldest religious texts of Hinduism, it has a deeper mystical significance, which refers to kavi being a poet seer, one who saw and found the inspired word of his vision. And to me, this kind of seeing by the maker of poems, of art, is what tonight's theme holds at its core. One such poet seer whom I deeply admire is the Nobel laureate from India, the 19th and early 20th century Bengali poet, Rabindranath Tagore. I'd like to open this evening with one of his poems, originally written in the Bengali language, translated by him into English. Little songs and little things come to my mind this morning. I seem to be floating on a stream in a boat, passing by the world on both banks. Every little scene gives a sigh and says, I go. World's pleasure and pain, like brother and sister, lift their pathetic eyes upon my face from afar. Homely love peeps from her cottage corner to give me her passing glance. With eager eyes, I gaze from my heart's window onto the heart of the world. And I feel that with all its good and bad, it is lovable. Thank you. The poem comes from this book here that I have. It's a pretty old book that I picked up in India on the streets of Kolkata, and it has a treasure of his poems and one of my favorite books to always go back to whenever I'm thinking about something meditative. And I love how this poem is an eloquent meditation on the transient nature of life. I love how this kavi, this poet seer, conveys a quiet reverence for the simplicity and complexity of existence. And if you have heard of Tagore before, you know that the multifarious personality of Tagore covered diverse terrains of creative expression, whether it's poetry, prose, plays, songs, music, and even paintings. And there's a T.S. Eliot quote that I'd like to share, where he said, Tagore's poetry, with its profound simplicity and spiritual depth, carries the fragrance of a wisdom that is universal, yet intimately personal. He speaks the language of the heart. That's true, isn't it? I feel that Tagore's vision is imbued with a profound connection to nature, to inner sight, and humanity, and that is what makes it so universal. And speaking of poetry that speaks the language of the heart, we are in for a treat tonight. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce my featured artist for this evening, poet and watercolorist Prartho Sereno. And I'd like to read her bio before I call upon her. Prartho Sereno credits 4+ years of inner exploration in India as her strongest creative influence, but also nods to excursions into other art forms. Counseling psychologist, vegetarian cook, mother of two, physical ed instructor at Cornell University, book and cover illustrator, and amateur singer songwriter. She has published 5 poetry collections, 4 of which have won national prizes, most recently, Starfall in the Temple. I have her book with me here, and I can tell you what a magical journey it is that she takes us on. Thank you so much, Partho, for this gift again. And moving on, Poet Laureate Emerita of Marin County, MFA Syracuse University, and Radio Disney super teacher. She was a poet in the schools for 21 years and currently teaches the Poetic Pilgrimage, poem making as spiritual practice online. I'll be sharing links to her website and her email later in the chats. But for now, let's hear her. A warm welcome to you, Prartho. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction, getting to hear Rabindranath and wonderful. So I'm so pleased to be here and see people that I know and people that I am getting to know now. And I think I'm going to jump right in. I've decided to try to read a little bit from all my books because I recently attended a reading of a friend and she did a retrospective and it suddenly felt like it's time to kind of look at the whole shebang. So I'm going to start with a poem from my first book, which was Call from Paris. And also it felt like just where I wanted to begin. It's called Slow Motion Mambo. For our next spin around the sun, let's bring down the tempo, commit ourselves to a slow saute of shuffle, swoop, and glide. Let's fall in with the polar bear's lumber, the newt's wobble, the sea turtle's heavy-lidded blink. We'll devote entire days to sweeping the walk, give way to beetles as they cross, to leaves as they color and fall. Let's tune ourselves to the wind harp, shake out the leaf sheets till they're fragrant with jasmine, hang up a hammock under the blossoms and not get up until the peaches are ripe. Let's take back roads home, moonwalk the children to school, cobble a life of gaze and hum and back stoop story. We'll stop saving time and spend it. We'll learn to wait till the mountains bow down and the rivers come home, until the lines of our bodies are almost erased, so that light wanders through us as if we were Saturday morning. So the next poem is also from Call from Paris. And, it took a very long time, anybody that's thinking about publishing, I kept pulling poems in and putting them back. And eventually Call from Paris did win a wonderful publishing prize with the Washington WordWorks Press, the WordWorks. Anyway, this is Juvenile Hall. This, of course, goes with my experience as a teacher at Juvenile Hall, which was my very first job as a poet in the school. So I did do it for the full 21 years, went to Juvenile Hall, and it was one of my favorite jobs. They were so open in some way. It's kind of, it's one of those paradoxes in life, really. And this poem has that paradox in it. juvenile hall. Giovanni is not in poetry class today. He's in lockup, chants my wayward Greek chorus, and for a moment he's conjured up out of the hole, standing there in his orange sweats, all 17 years, 6.5 feet of him, cockeyed grin, incandescent globe of hair, hands dangling like shoes tossed over a telephone wire. Funny how the freedom riders always gallop full steam into lockup. The ones whose poetry we love, who can turn the sky into a rainbow trout, serve it up with a hot sauce of snow. Funny how his presence tastes more like wind than a room with no mattress or windows, more like a gust of laughter, so sweet and clear, even the guards close their eyes to hear. I'm actually going to skip ahead a little because we're going to start showing some of my illustrations that kind of match some of these poems, but I'm going to do a few before we get to that. So this was my third book of poetry, and it's called Elephant Raga. And I think this poem kind of explains the Elephant Raga part. This was actually my master's thesis from my MFA at Syracuse University that I got in my 60s, my mid 60s, and that's not the 60s, that's my 60s. So it was quite the experience. All my fellow students were in their 20s, and I flew back and forth. I shoveled snow and walked through ice all winter, but I could come and go and visit my sweetheart here in our home. And so I was in a lot of baggage claims, and that's where this takes place. It's called Deplaning. At the far end of baggage claim, in their pastel shirts and navy blue blazers, they look so longingly in my direction, jiggling their hopeful block-lettered signs. Hernandez? Patel? Moore? I want to go to one and say, yes, I am Mrs. Moore, then turn and walk with him into a new life. Yes, I want to say to everything. Hyatt Regency poolside, yes, praise the Lord. Oh, thank you. These bags seem to put on pounds with each new time zone. Am I attending the conference? Why, yes, I'm giving it a keynote on my life's work with elephants. Yes, amazing what they have to say in registers beneath the human ear, expressions of love for which we have no name. No, I never made out the actual words, but they taught me with a subterranean patience. I learned to sleep standing on the savannah, rocked by a long, slow chorus of grass-scented breath. Yes, I can see that traffic is terrible this way. I don't mind at all if we take the back road. And do tell me about your time with the bears, especially the scrappy one with the torn up ear. He led you upriver, and you watched the salmon spawn, and that fish still flops in the pit of you, that fish you shared with the gleaming, slobbering dark. And the next one is also in Elephant Raga. So that's where the elephants came from in the title, Elephant Raga. A raga is great too, because you'll find little bits of India always sneaking into my poetry, because as my introduction said, I credit really my time in India as my deepest creative influence, really. And a raga is kind of it's improvised on a scale. And so that's how I feel about my poetry. It has an improv feeling as it moves through me and out. But this poem actually is, I think, why I went to Syracuse for 3 years and shoveled snow. This was the poem I needed to write there. And I will also say that I found there, contrary to my earlier self, that academia was not my home. And this poem kind of speaks to that. It's called Magdalene Faces the Tribunal. of quantifiable evidence and measurable outcomes. So it's all in Magdalene's voice. Yes, it is possible, I suppose, that he hypnotized us, and we only imagined ourselves in those silent depths. That he tricked our minds into peace, our bodies into ease, created the illusion that we were whole. And yes, perhaps we only felt as if we were loved with abandon. He smelled like rain, and his voice made my bones hum like 1,000 dulcimers. Yes, it probably was just an imaginary wind that brought us to his feet and blew us back into lives that are now somehow on fire. And I suppose one could make the case that he faked the whole thing, that he was just like the rest of us, tiny as a grain of rice in a bubbling kettle of stars. He may have only brought laughter to our days and dancing to our feet, only made it seem a blessing to be alive. No, sirs, I have nothing to show. None of us got rich or made ourselves a name. But often I find my pillow is wet if I wake in the night and think of him. So I
Beautiful
think,
poems there, Prartho.
thank you. Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
we can do some that have pictures.
Absolutely, yeah. Although, Prartho, there are so many lines that have resonated from the poems that you just read, and I would just like to have our audience listen to those again and just revisit those words. The ones whose poetry we love, who can turn the sky into rainbow trout, serve it up with a hot sauce of snow. Wow, beautiful. What imagination there. Even when you mentioned there, rocked by a long, slow chorus of grass-scented breath. And he smelled like rain, and his voice made my bones hum like 1,000 dulcimers, a bubbling kettle of stars. So many images there, and what amazing imagery. I love the way you blend reality with the fantastical, Prartho, and it brings me to what Lee Young Lee, the poet, mentioned, that the poet has to access a condition of knowing, and it seems you've accessed that brilliantly. There is a willingness to explore, a pursuit of discovery, and at times also displaying a levity that refreshingly sets your writing apart from most other poetry with a metaphysical bent. And I have a question for you regarding that. As a meditator, you've meditated for many years, and as a mystic poet as well, how does meditation as spiritual practice influence your creative process and the clarity of your vision for your poetry?
I love that you said that about the humor, because I really think that's a trademark of meditation, actually. Something about seeing things come and go and come and go. I think that that does add humor. And it, to me, humor feels like I'm getting close to the path, the well earned path. And the other thing I guess I'd say about meditation is that it's a practice of just accessing nothing. I mean, that's the best way I can say it. In a certain way, it's like nothing is bigger than anything else, nothing smaller than anything else. To me, that's what the state is like. It's a very quiet state. I can't say I always get to that quiet state. And sometimes that quiet state, I would say, also visits, and through practice, I get to recognize it. It will visit in an ordinary moment, when I'm taking a walk or when I'm talking with someone or when I'm reading a poem, that space will come again, and it's very open, it's very spacious, and so I do think as a poet, and this is what I really teach pretty much too, is that a poet is essentially a listener. I'm listening for, there's another voice in me that is much simpler and wiser than I am, and funnier than I am. So I think that's my connection to the meditative process in poetry.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Prartho. And do you think it is that nothingness that you mentioned which brings that clarity of vision when you're writing?
Mm. Yeah, I do.
Because sometimes in that void or in that nothingness also there can be so many insights and knowledge, like what Lee said, that the poet has to access a condition of knowing, and that
Mhm.
knowing happens in this space where nothing else is happening.
It's so interesting because it's things I don't really think I know. I mean, I think
Mm,
that's why a lot of us write poetry, you know. We find out things we had no idea we knew. How
true.
did I know that, you know? Um, it's a little bit like that when I'm painting too, actually. You know, like I'll start a painting, I'll think, I need fire. And I think, oh, I don't know how to paint fire. And then I'll just be splashing around. All of a sudden there's fire there. I mean, poetry is a bit like that also, it feels like, you know, there's a kind of a let go. I would say that the heart of meditation really is a let go of any control, of any trying to get anywhere or do anything. And the other thing is, though, like you were saying, it's a journey because
Mm,
I'm only interested in a poem that's taking me where I've never been.
mm,
You know, I'm not interested in finding out what I think I know because I already do that all day long. I'm interested in hearing this other voice and with the silence around it. That's the other reason I love poetry, really, is that it shows us the silence. I mean, even on the page, there's silence on the page. There's silence in between. It's the one way of speaking that invites silence all around it. And I have always a lot to say. That reminds me of when I taught in an Alzheimer's clinic for a while. And I had them writing. I mean, they couldn't write anymore, most of them, but they could speak. And so I would, you know, take down the poems for them. And then I read quite a few poems before we even started. And when I would read a poem, they would just be astounded. They would say, doesn't that just say it? They couldn't tell you what it says, you know, but they could feel it. They could feel um, the spaciousness and the truth. Somehow
mm.
they go together, the spaciousness and the truth.
That's beautifully put, Prartho.
Mhm.
And it makes so much sense. And I think so many of the things you have said uh, also go parallel with your artwork, probably, that we'll see now. So
Mhm.
yeah, on that note,
Okay,
let me bring those up, and maybe while you offer us a couple of poems, I'll have those the other questions that I have for you
okay.
interspersed within.
So we're going to
I'll
look at
just
some pictures first.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll take a minute here to share. Is it visible? The
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I'll just enlarge it so it goes on the slideshow mode. And there we have it.
Mhm.
Um, you can tell me, Prartho, which slide would you
You know,
prefer?
I'm happy to
Or
just go where it is. Let's just do that.
yeah, sure.
So let's see, the scent of jasmine. So that's from the book that just came out. And this one, I'm happy to do this one. Well, first of all, you could see the Indian influence in this painting. And
Mhm.
I often will start by looking at an image somewhere. And this was an image in a book. It was called The World's People or something. And there was a woman with a pot on her head, which I've always, ever since I first went to India, I'm always drawing women with pots on their heads because I just love that way of carrying your load. It's so graceful and so beautiful. And I fell in love with the water buffaloes always too, that were everywhere. Um, and then I decided I was going to paint her, and I decided, I don't know, decided is probably not even the right word, that somehow I never wanted to paint the eyes into the cows, and I didn't want to paint her face in. And then it sort of became this what I think what we were just talking about, really, the one who married emptiness, the one who allowed the
Mm,
emptiness to fill her. And so the poem that I paired this with, and I will say that the poem was written separately from the watercolor, and that's true of everything here, almost everything. There's a couple that are exceptions, but for the most part, I just paint what I feel and I write what I feel. But you know, because it's me, there's that connection, I guess, through my experience. So the poem that I paired this with is called The Scent of Jasmine, which reminds me always of India, actually, because there was jasmine everywhere.
Mhm.
And but it's a contrapuntal, so it's a little bit strange. I'm going to try to read it the way one can read it. So it's in 2 columns, and you can read it down and get a poem on one column. You can read the other column down and get a poem, or you can read it across and get a poem. So I'm going to read it in the 3 ways. So here we go. The Scent of Jasmine. In India, I found cowbell clangor persists. It will haunt you, clanking with joy, dizzy with morning, jasmine scented, beyond the gate, in his tethered turban and lungi, the watcher stands, guard, as translucent as hunger and the thirst in the alabaster eye. Now the one on the other side. If nothing else, life remains peculiar. In the end, a life is laid bare. All roads lead to where we are going. In the midst of birth and death, we are dismantled. At last, we give in to the pull that gathers the love of this great storm. Now I'm going to read the poem as it is, across. They're all poems. And that was the really interesting, fun thing to do, is to just see, meld these ideas together. So in India, I found, if nothing else, cowbell clangor persists. Life remains peculiar. It will haunt you. In the end, a life clanking with joy is laid bare, dizzy with morning. All roads lead jasmine scented to where we are going, beyond the gate, in the midst of birth, and in his tattered turban and lungi, death. The watcher stands guard as we are dismantled, translucent as hunger. At last we give in to the pull and the thirst that gathers the love in the alabaster eye of this great dark storm. So I guess I'll go to In Friendship's Garden. This is also from my most recent book. And so the poem, the painting, sorry, is In Friendship's Garden. I have to find the, oh, where is everything? It is getting a little mixed up here, but I'll find it. Oh, yes. So the painting here, some might recognize it. In the Ferry Building, there is a coffee in San Francisco. There's a coffee shop that has these women that are pouring coffee for each other. I put the colors in. I changed a lot of things, and I gave them a giraffe. And so this is called In Friendship's Garden, and I just, friendship is one of the great things of life. And the poem I paired this with is one that I wrote when I was teaching online during COVID. And I was teaching a 6th grade class, and I said, let's just give ourselves a little encouragement about what we're going through. So try to give yourself some instructions about how do we get through this. And I sat down and wrote my own to try to inspire. And I was, as I think everyone was, and I think maybe I've learned a little from this, I was overcome with uncertainty. Like, what is this going to mean? Are people going to die in my family? What am I going to? What's going to happen? And so my poem is called How to Befriend Uncertainty. Come, sit in the seat by the window, near the birds who have shaken off their dreams and opened themselves to this never to be again day. Today, we won't be asked to bumble along the beaten byways, for uncertainty is our house guest. Put on the water, put out the homemade jam. Uncertainty will listen with us as our bagels pop from the toaster's dark mouth and the coffee grounds weep their bittersweet sobs. Uncertainty is mystery's love child. No history, no proper name, but she has always been with us. She is the one who wakes us in the morning to drizzle new questions into our days, new stories, new colors and light. The wind is her breath. Her body is the water we bathe in and drink. Uncertainty, with her barefoot dancing gypsy soul, knows the unpaved roads to gratitude by heart. But of certain things, like tomorrow, she knows nothing. And because of this, her love knows no bounds.
Oh, exquisite pieces there, just as these paintings are, Prartho. And there's so much wonder and possibility you hear in these poems. Just love both of them. And I wanted to ask you, did you mentioned that you wrote them and painted separately, but when you pair them, does the painting happen before the poem often, or is it the other way
Mm,
around?
Well, they happen separately, really. I mean, I have when I'm fed up with words, I go to my studio. I have the great blessing of having a little area that's just for my paints, and I can leave them out there. And I go to my studio and paint. And um, then it's more like I have these collections, a collection of
Mm.
paintings, a collection of poems. And then once in a while, like I have done, my website has a whole blog post that I've done before. It's called Painted Poems. And I
Mhm.
just match them um,
Wow.
by the way I feel about them.
That's amazing. I love that how you mentioned that when you get fed up with words. But
Mm.
I think what you've written, is mentioned on your website is, and I love that thought process you've shared there. And I'd like to quote you: "My life has been a quest for the lost continent of awe. With pen and brush as my oars, writing and painting take me there." Which is so beautiful as a thought, just like the Tagore poem that I read in the beginning,
Mm.
the boat passing by, and really you're watching the whole world pass by, and you're using your pen and brush as oars. And my question to you is, as a creative, your dialogue with poetry and painting is really powerful, both separately and in unison. How do you align your vision of the poem with your vision of the artwork when it is combined?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's kind of it's a mysterious process, and that's probably also why I love it because, as I said before, I don't want to know the answer ahead of time. I'm really
Right.
interested in something that's not even conclusive, even in the end, but just sort of a singing to each other. So, like in these cases, "The Scent of Jasmine" was a poem I wanted to share because I really think it's pretty interesting how you can read a set of words in various orders and it will make different kinds of senses. And I wanted to revisit India during this reading. And so then, of course, I went to that painting because it's so evocative of India. And so that's what happened. And I felt well, it does work. It works because, um, it's got they have the same mystery and emptiness and scent in it somehow. And the same with this one, the other one, the watercolor of Friendship's Garden. I just wanted to paint that because I loved that relationship between the women. And I always loved to make things more magical and mystical. So I threw in the
Mhm.
giraffe, one of my favorite animals. And then I just thought, well, the whole thing about befriending things that are
Mm.
difficult
Right.
matched somehow. And then I even saw it even had putting on the water for tea. So there you go.
Wow, that's brilliant. And I really enjoyed putting this presentation together for you, Prartho. And what I loved also is the contrast that appears in both these images here, where one is nightfall and the other seems to be morning time or
Mhm, mhm.
really bright sunshine. And it's amazing how you have, in both of these paintings, I see the light works very differently. And that's what I love about watercolors, how it uses light and
Mm,
shadow, and you're really a master at it.
mm.
But yeah, I would love to hear the next couple of poems you have. If you're ready, I can move to the other
Sure.
slide.
Yes, let's do that. Oh,
Is
good.
this the
Okay.
right one? Or
Okay,
I?
yeah, that's okay. Let's start with the sugar spoon. So this is my granddaughter, and it's from a book called do I have it up there? Yeah, Causing a Stir: The Secret Lives and Loves of Kitchen Utensils. So this book is illustrated by me, and so every one of the kitchen utensils of various types um, have a person in them. And I wrote the first poem when I was teaching a high school class. I said, let's do a set of something. What if you write about the quarter and the nickel and the dime? Or what if you read about the days of the week? Or I said, or what about kitchen utensils? And then I thought, okay, I think I'll write one. So I wrote the soup spoon, and I loved it. And then I thought, okay, I'll just keep going. And eventually I got to the sugar spoon. I wanted to bring this one because I love this painting, and it's of my granddaughter. And I have four, wait a minute, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 4 grandchildren and only 1 granddaughter. So this is for her.
That ought to
And
make it special.
yeah, and that's a picture I painted of her. And actually she's wearing a little I think Punjabi suit that I got her in India when I was in India 1 year. So
Ah,
she's
now I
now,
see it.
yeah, she's got a little dupatta around her and like
Yeah.
and that was, I looked at a photo. She's now 22, so she doesn't look like that anymore, but but a little bit she does. Okay, this is called Soup Spoon. Venus on the half shell. The sugar spoon rises from a sea of blinding light, finds herself alone, unable to remember where she came from or who brought her to this shimmering world. Star-struck urchin, adrift in your porcelain canoe, you may be a stranger in this strange land, but you are not alone. There are many of us here, startled and agog by the sweetness we find each day in our bowls. So, I mean, one of the things that was fun about doing this book is each kitchen utensil has a different place they live, they have a different circumstance, and the sugar spoon is alone. Yeah, if the sugar spoon lives in the sugar bowl, which many of them do, she's all by herself. So she has this sort of sense of, being in this beautiful, sweet world, but alone. And so that's where that poem kind of got inspired. So for the drifters, we'll do that one. For the drifters, I'll just say about this painting. One of the things I love about this painting is when I was at Syracuse, my minor was painting. And my first professor, he could see that I needed to loosen up. So he told me, because I was worried about cost. So he had me buy the biggest, most beautiful piece of arch paper you can get, which is the most expensive paper in America. And then he had me spill coffee on it. So that's how this painting began. And you can still sort of see the coffee, of course. And then I threw a few green tea bags in it. So that's some of the green. And I matched this one. Boats do. You mentioned Tagore's poem about the boat. And boats really move me. I actually, I do row a boat with my boyfriend on weekends, often in the bay. And we take the ferry and, we just love being on the water, both of us. But this poem, I also have to say this, is called For the Drifters. And it was my friend Bodie, who, a very dear friend who's now gone. He died in his 90s. So he had a good full life. But when he was 80, he called me and said he was 80. And I said, wow, how did that happen? He said, I don't know. He said, I was a drifter. And I said, oh, okay. He said, I just drifted here. Okay. So this one is called, and many of you may feel connected to this poem. It's for you too, For the Drifters. They say the continents are still drifting, nudged each year a little further into the blue. And through the sand and waterways drift the herds, goat tribes and ant colonies, pods of whales and knots of toads. For millennia, dust has drifted in and out of doorways, and in their seasons, pollen and snow. It turns out even glass drifts. The vertical panes that hold our world in place are more like sheets of rain than walls, their bottoms growing thicker down the years. And so it seems we're all leaning on water, but some of us lean harder, deeper. This poem is for you, the fallen, with limbs worn to silk, for you, light-footed ones, tramped on in the fray. This poem is for all of you solitary singers, awash in your own song. Sleep well tonight, my troubadours. Let the boat of your regret unmoor itself and drift away. The shimmer of harbor lights will reappear when that great dark ship floats out.
It's an exquisite piece again, Prartho, and what a breathtaking flight of fancy you take in when you make those word choices. I really love the imagery that just leaps across the page. And I personally admire your imagination that seems so fearless and boundless, just like the coffee you spilt on that paper. I think, but I also really enjoy how this transports the listener or the reader instantly with how you do it. And about your process of wonder and discovery, it is constant in your approach to art making, I see. But along with being magical, I also see that your poetry is very grounding in reality. And I wanted to ask you about the kind of plurality of voices or perspectives your work holds as a poet and a visual artist. How has your own perspective evolved by embracing this plurality?
Mm, that's a really interesting question. One of the things is I do, like, even when I did the silverware book, I really tried to, some of them rhyme. I really tried to stretch and see if I could take different ways in. I'm really interested in entering in a new way. Like I said, I've said many times, I want it to be new and fresh for me. I'm my first audience is me. I write poems. In fact, they ask you all of that in graduate school. Who are you writing for? And it's for me, and also, but I'd also say for my brothers, who were very grounded, and they didn't think they liked poetry. So I said, I want poems that my brothers will get and like. So, so the question was about plurality, though, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Say again what you want me to talk about.
Yeah, the plurality in your voice and in your perspective as a poet and a visual
Mm.
artist, how have you embraced that, and has your perspective evolved while embracing that plurality of voice?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when I went to graduate school in my 60s, and then they had us doing all kinds of exercises with poetry and trying different voices, pretending I was, Robert Frost or something. And at some point, I said to my advisor, I feel like I've lost my voice. I don't know who I am anymore. And he
Mhm,
said, which I've kept, he said many very wise things. And Brooks Haxton was his name. And he said, don't worry about it. Every poem has its own voice.
mhm,
And just be true to the voice that comes for that poem. And so I do, in a way, feel like the poem and even the painting guides me. So, and like I said, it is, I'm always trying to find a slightly new route to discovery
mhm, mhm,
and to awe, like what I said, the lost continent of awe. When you read that again, I was feeling how, that, because I love being around children, and having been in a poet in the schools, I was so blessed. I did lots of first grade, so I was with really young children. And that the place that they're all in, every single one of them, is wonder. They go into other places too. They can be mischievous, but they are essentially wonder beings. And so I'm always trying to be there as much as I can in my
mhm,
life. Yeah.
mhm. That's beautiful. Pratha, we do have time for one more poem before we close the
Mhm.
featured segment, and of course you'll be with us after the open mic as well. But would you like me to go to the other slide, or is that a poem,
Well, let's go
painted
to the
poem
slide.
as
Sure,
well?
let's go to the slide. I think their book covers the next one.
And then I can, yeah, bring it up again
Mhm.
if you like.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is it's perfect. I will end with Indian Rope Trick, because I haven't read anything from
Yeah.
that book. This is the cover, which I painted the cover, and I painted it for, this time the poem was already written. Excuse me. The poem was already written, and the book was going to be titled by this poem. And so I did the cover, but it took many tries. When you do it that way, it's harder. So I will give a slight introduction, and that is that this poem is written about my brother. The book itself is about many people passing. I think many of us know that passings seem to happen in groups. And so my brother and four close friends all died within a couple of years. And this book was the result of that. And some people think of it as a grieving book. I would not say that. It was more the mystery of that, and that's what this poem is really about. So I think maybe it will be self-explanatory if I just read it. Oh, one more thing though, probably helps. And that is that there was a trick, a rumored trick in India called the Indian rope trick, which was that the magician would get a rope, throw it into the air, it would stay vertical, and then his assistant would climb the rope and at the top disappear. So it's a legendary trick. There have even been calls to see if anybody can reproduce it. I don't know if anybody's been capable of doing that, but so that I've always been fascinated by that idea of that trick. And then when I found out that my brother had passed, I sat for a few minutes, and that it was the perfect metaphor. So here we go. Indian rope trick. It's the mystery's favorite trick, weaving the intricate rope of someone's life, then lifting it for them to climb and somewhere near the top disappear. 2 weeks ago, my brother told me he'd shot 9 holes. Pain was lousy, he said, but went on to practice punchlines he'd been trying out for his meeting with the maker. I'm not afraid to die, he said, with that curious wonder he had since the diagnosis. But this time he added that he had no regrets, none worth counting anyway. I'd taken my phone on my walk and was talking to him from the mountain at the level of ravens and hawks. He'd had a wonderful life, he said, which caused the rope of it to rise and grow taut so that we could see it there in all its color. There in his yellow cowboy pajamas with his champion Alaskan yo-yo. There in the glow of his cherry bomb days. There at the helm of the stolen tractor on a joyride over the golf club greens. And look, now he's doing figure eights on his forklift in the basement of Kodak. And now he's blasting off, bottle rocket style, to international VP. See him there in Paris and Philly. See him adrift on South Carolina's inlet seas. And here come the whole buzzing swarm of friends drawn in by the honey of his ease. Ah, we seem to have followed that rope right up through the clouds. I couldn't have asked for more, he said, and his exhale filled the valley, and the hawks were lifted up on the rising air, and we said goodbye.
Wow, your poems are really an invitation to dream and to believe in that magic you mentioned. I'm glad you picked this poem to close the reading with, Prartho. It has so much magic in it, and we all believe in it when we are listening to it. And you also make us believe in the magic that poetry can summon. It's amazing. It brings me to my final question for you. Let me quickly, though, close the slide, if it is okay.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, give me a minute, please. Okay, I had lost my mouse for a minute. But yeah, it brings me to my final question, Prartho. Is I was listening to Joy Harjo, and she's such a multifaceted poet as well, and dabbling in all other art forms as well, along with poetry. And what she said really resonated. Is that she mentioned that I feel as an artist that I have a responsibility towards growing vision, compassion, and one artist in a community can make quite a bit of change. Artists can give voice or vision to a community. And I wanted to ask, how do you see your role as an artist and as a teacher of poetry in fostering vision and compassion within your community? And in what ways do you believe artists can be catalysts for meaningful change?
I love that because I realize that's all I have to give. It's all I have is, what I can make, and it's what I've been given. And but I do feel especially in the years that I've been teaching, I have a wonderful group of community of poets who have gathered around and do the Poetic Pilgrimage, which is the course that I teach online. And I never teach the same session ever twice. So it's always new. And I'm always learning. And what I've seen, for one thing, is that sometimes the most difficult experiences in life, when someone puts it into a poem, it redeems it. It somehow, there's redemption in poetry, and it redeems it. I mean, where it's not like, the person didn't get raped. It's not like, it's not in that hard science way. But that's what I'm more and more trust in, because it feels like that's the only way, is somehow this underground. All of us were healed. The trauma that the poet felt was healed. And the healing spreads, I think, somehow. And so, it's a metaphysical process, I think, but I do think it's our biggest hope, quite honestly.
Absolutely, Prartho.
Yeah.
And when you were reading that poem as well, like you mentioned, that many people call it a grieving book of poems, but I feel that what you just said, it feels so much more true, that it probably is a book of healing than of grieving, and that healing is with so much hope. And really wonderful to hear all your poems tonight, Prartho. Thank you so much, and much gratitude for sharing your vision and your wisdom through these poems and paintings. I'm really in awe of how you bring so much beauty and depth and authenticity and magic as well into all that you create. I'm truly basking in the poetic richness tonight, and I'm sure our audience is taking in everything as well. I'd like to open the floor briefly for comments from our audience. If you'd like to take a moment to unmute yourself, please go ahead. And meanwhile, keep an eye out on the chat for a link to Prartho's website and email that has her books and other information as well. I'll be posting it now.
I especially liked the pairing of the images and the poems. It was really beautiful to see, and also to hear what you had to say about your inspiration and the mysticism. So thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful.
I wanted to thank you as well. It was, it did reach into kind of a magic place. And I know, like, when my mother-in-law died, I think I wrote one of my better poems that I've ever written. She was a dear friend to me. And so, yes, I think sometimes those transitory things can lead us to that. So I really appreciated it. And I may look up your poetic pilgrimage.
Please do. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciated all the poems and artwork, but I especially appreciated what you had to say about the influence of meditation and your description of trying to draw fire, and when you started out, you really didn't know how or how it was going to happen, and then it was there. I think all writers, to a certain extent, can relate to that. I mean, many times I will go back to look at things I've written, and I don't know how it happened, but what you had to say about meditation, I try to meditate regularly, really struck a chord, and I appreciate that.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks everyone. Once again, Prartho, thank you for your time and such a gracious offering. It was really enriching to hold this conversation tonight, and really an honor to host you as well. I hope you had a wonderful time as well.
Oh, it was an honor to be with you very much. Thank
Oh,
you.
well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone again for sharing such wonderful comments and your thoughts with our feature. And please save the information in the chat. It has Prartho's website and email as well if you'd like to purchase copies of her books and also register for the Poetic Pilgrimage series that is starting next week. You can look it up on her website. And with that, we are going to stop recording this segment. Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. And to our YouTube audience, thanks for tuning in and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.